Over the last 4 or 5 years, I've been working around tech startups and PR, either publishing press releases for funding announcements or product expansions, or on the other side, as is in the case with MAGNiTT, and publishing press releases. And so I think that there's a lot of different ways that you can do this, but this is the way that I found that makes a lot of sense. And the idea is that you are low resource, but you want to do your own PR, you want to get your story out there. So what's the best way to do that without expending a lot of time and energy and money to get your story out there? This is the concept. So I'm going to run you through how and there's different ways to do this, but how I plan PR campaigns from start to finish, and then how I implement PR campaigns from start to finish, and then how we can evaluate them. So for planning, everybody will tell you that there's a different way to do it, but I found that it always helps to know it always helps to start with knowing what we're trying to achieve. So when I plan a PR campaign, the first thing I start with is forget PR. Why am I running this campaign? How does it match up to a specific business objective that this PR will then help support or bolster? So I'll run you guys through this like PR seminar with a case study. So there's a tech startup in Egypt that is looking to expand to Saudi Arabia. So they've raised their seed at some point and they want to raise their Series A and expand to Saudi Arabia. So how can PR support with that? But first we start with the business objective. We want to scale, we're an Egyptian PR company, an Egyptian tech company, and we want to scale to the KSA. This is our objective. So let's make sure that the story that we're telling and the key messages that we're putting out in our press release are consistent with what we're trying to achieve. But first we start with the why of the PR campaign. And then we go down to the key messages, which is very clearly in one sentence, what am I actually trying to say? What am I trying to signal to the market that if it gets out there the way I want it to get out there is going to help support the why, the initial thing that we wanted to achieve. So this takes a little bit of soul searching, and it also takes a little bit of introspection. So your key message has to pass the so what test. So it needs to be something that is interesting, even if you don't work at your startup, and it needs to be something that people understand, even if they don't work at your startup. So what is it that's happening inside your company? Did you just hire somebody very interesting? Have you just raised a round? Have you just signed a strategic partnership with something really major? Have you scaled? Did you have something very interesting happening in terms of user retention or acquisition off the charts? Find your hook, the story, and that's your key message to tell whatever story you're trying to tell. If you have prepared for your Series A fundraise by recruiting a super team or by launching and scaling into different places, those are stories that need to be told, and this is the great avenue to tell that story. But what you need to do is make sure that the message is not crowded. Ideally, you should never be pushing out more than 1 or 2, at most 3 key messages per PR campaign or press release. After you've sat down, had a conversation with yourself and your team, use somebody else as a sounding board who's not going to be afraid to tell you, no, this isn't interesting. You can then start thinking about who you're trying to get this message to. So your key message, and this is a little bit controversial, but your key message, I think, should always come before your audience. So a lot of people think, oh, in the case of our fictional company, scaling to Saudi Arabia, you want partners in Saudi Arabia, so that's who you're targeting, and you should optimize around that. I think your key messages as a company should be consistent, and you can then operationalize them or deploy them in different ways, depending on the stakeholders that you're speaking to. But effectively, what you're saying, your core messages are the same. So then you start thinking about your audience. What are my audience reading? Who are they? Where are they? What are they interested in? And you start tailoring the key message as it exists to that audience. So scaling to Saudi Arabia, the super fast user acquisition might be a very compelling story to tell there. Adoption in markets similar to that. Just think through on a human level. What will somebody find interesting, and what tells the story that I want to tell? After you figured out your who, so I'm speaking to target demographic A, B, Y, who are based. Who are based in wherever they're based. How am I going to reach these people? I'm going to reach these people by getting into the publications or the events that they happen to be at. So do your research on the publications that are popular with your target demographic. So if you know that investors are reading magazine X, MAGNiTT, if you know that they're reading MAGNiTT, then that's a publication that you want to target your messages towards. If you know that they're reading something very, very specific, industry specific, then you want to start reaching out there. If you guys are really focused on something core technology or transport, all of these industries have leader publications that you would definitely benefit from being featured in. One is it's great exposure, and two, it's also for earlier stage startups, it's a seal of credibility. It's a seal of validation, and it's great for backlinks to your site, respectable backlinks, fantastic for SEO. And then you need to apply a little bit of common sense about your when. So you definitely can't predict the future, but if you know that something massive is happening, and where you fit into the news cycle is really important. So oftentimes people say, oh, we want to push this press release out on X date. But X date happens to be a Wednesday. And so we always ask, why would you want to do that yourself? You want your news to take up as much of the news cycle as possible. So if it gets published on a Sunday or Monday, that gives journalists 4 or 5 working days to pick it up and amplify your message. And momentum is key. You don't want it to go out on a Thursday, fall into the weekend, people fall asleep, come into the new week having forgotten it, and then your story doesn't get as much space or runway as it otherwise could have if you've just done it a little bit earlier in the week. Also, for people who come from different countries, if you're targeting a US-based publication, Saturdays and Sundays are their weekends, you don't want to get them on one of those days. So we just need to be sensitive around where we're fitting into the news cycle. If you want to announce a Series A investment, but this morning somebody announced $30 million, you can be pretty sure that that's going to dominate the news cycle for a while. So just wait until that dies down and then find your opportune moment and be flexible around it, because ultimately whether or not things get published, I think comes down to 2 things. One is where it fits into somebody's news cycle, and 2, kind of how practical or meaningful is it to the journalist to cover it themselves. So everybody is busy and there's so many inbound requests all the time. Oh, I see we're getting questions. I will finish this and then I will answer all of these questions, if that's okay. So we can definitely talk about the where later. So the when is really important. So just to sum up everything that we've said, I like to start with where this fits into business objective very clearly. Then what am I actually saying? What is my key message? Who am I saying it to? Having figured out those 3 things, it becomes much easier to figure out my where. Whether my where is a particular event or my where is a particular publication or a particular channel. And then ultimately is the when, and that just that's not a PR thing, it's just a little bit of common sense applied. So if the news cycle is already taken up, you don't want to interrupt that, and you want to make it as practical as possible for somebody to cover it, and you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot. And then comes the big one, which is the how. So I can tell you 5,000 million ways that people shouldn't send press releases. Because the how, the implementation, comes down to 2 things. One, it comes down to preparing the content. So here, let's take the content as a press release, because typically that's what happens. Although content can come in many different ways and shapes and forms. It can come in thought leadership pieces, which we can also discuss, or it can come in a speech, or it can come in, but press releases, I think, is the most standard, and that's how most journalists, or like specific media pitches is another way that you can do it. Let's stay with the most standard one, which is a press release. A press release is a pretty standard document. On the internet, there are so many templates that tell you exactly how it should be formatted, how the header should be, and the subheader, and then the copy, and then the date. And so let's take 2 steps back. The dissemination of the press release, the actual how of the press release, is preparing the content and then sharing the content. So preparing the content, I think, is where so many of us have trouble, or at least I've seen tons of press releases where it seems that the person sending it hasn't taken the time or the effort to familiarize themselves with press release format. So ultimately, the point of this section is you need to make people's lives as easy as possible if you want to get your story out there. That's the whole message, is make people's lives as easy as possible. That means that the information needs to come in a format that they're expecting to see. So a press release, people know how to make it. Journalists and people who are working to publish press releases know how to make sense of them. So we have the key messages as a subtitle. Sometimes we have bullet points, we have the date, we have somebody that we can contact. It flows like a story, it's coherent. We start off with who is the company, blah, blah, founded in blah, blah, which does, and you have to say what you do in one sentence. So effectively, people should be able to read this press release, and it shouldn't be too long. People should be able to look at this press release and see one page and kind of know who you are and what you're saying. So it needs to be clear. If you're targeting English language publications or Arabic language publications, the grammar needs to be consistent, the spelling needs to be consistent, it needs to be as clear as possible. And if you need somebody to proofread it for you, or somebody to tell you this isn't interesting, or I don't understand what this means, there are so many press releases that we get where we have no idea what the person is announcing, or they're just one paragraph long, so it seems like the person hasn't fleshed it out with quotes or stories. Or so writing the press release is something that anybody can go online and familiarize themselves with the format. But a very, very clear and consistent format that most people are familiar with is that you have your header, which contains the piece of news. And then you have a couple of key messages, never more than 2 or 3. And then your first paragraph needs to, oh yeah, sorry, because I can see questions. Your first paragraph needs to say who your company is and what the news is. And it needs to link back to your company. So often we get press releases that aren't hyperlinked. So you have to go and find like 4 different companies that kind of have the same name and you don't know which one it is. And then you talk about the news. What is the actual news? Who is the founding team is usually a consistently good one. Who are the investors if there's an investment, or if there's a strategic partnership, why don't we have quotes from both partners? These are all things that need to be in kind of a coherent narrative format. And then at the end, there always needs to be somebody that we can reach out to. And in terms of making people's lives easier, how you send and disseminate these press releases is, again, making people's lives easier. You need to send, if you're sending a press release, depending on who you're sending it to, they might want to have follow-up questions, and they're definitely, if they want to publish it, they definitely want an image. So make sure you're not you're not overburdening them with like a really heavy press kit. You are sending them a press release in PDF format, very clear, and you're sending them a reasonably high resolution, but not too heavy image of you or your founding team, or whatever image needs to come along. These are the things that we ask for at MAGNiTT, the things that they need to publish the story. And in your email, or however you're sending it to the journalist, you need to, again, summarize very quickly and very clearly, as simply as possible, what the news is, what the announcement is, and that you've attached the press release and the photo so that they know that everything is in one place. As with any and all business matters, it's also nice to be nice. If you have sent somebody your press release and they haven't answered you and you send them quite an unkind message, they're probably not very likely to want to publish it. I speak from experience. You're building a relationship with people. You're trying to have a long-lasting relationship with journalists or the people that happen to be publishing. And it also helps to find out, when you're pitching for like larger publications, it helps to find out what the journalist has been writing about historically. Where does your story fit into that in particular? So in my Saudi case study, if my company does transport, it helps to find out if there's somebody who's been covering transport extensively, or if there's somebody that, when one of the publications that I want, that's covering technology startups extensively. Yeah, so that's the how and the preparation. How do we disseminate? So the way that I do it is I started off with a very simple Excel sheet with the publications I like, as in the publications that I think, having gone through steps 1, 2, 3, 4, that makes sense for whatever company I was doing PR for, or whether it's MAGNiTT or whether it was another tech startup. These are the publications that I want. I would like to identify the people that work there that might be adequate. You build out a media list. And you build out a media list by asking somebody very nicely if they have an email, by getting introductions, by finding them on LinkedIn and messaging them and seeing if they're interested in speaking to you. But no matter what, again, you're speaking to a person, they have to like you. So you can't be too pushy. You can't be too salesy. You need to just, the idea is that you're putting everything that you want to be presenting on a plate, so it's as simple as possible, and it becomes easy for the journalist, if they're interested, to take it up. And it's not always about one publication, right? So it's also about building a relationship. So maybe this time they won't cover you, but the next time that they're thinking about writing about transport technology or early stage startups in Riyadh or whatever, they're going to think of you and you're going to be top of mind. And they're going to be like, oh, maybe I should reach out to my friend and get a quote. Or this person who had pitched me a story and was very nice, and even though I couldn't cover it at the time, I'd still like something. We are in a very lucky position as an industry at the moment, is that with the increased like sizes of funding rounds, so if anyone read the MAGNiTT report, I think funding rounds, average funding round now is about $1.7 million, which is up a significant amount from years prior. We're getting more and more media attention, and governments all over the region are becoming more and more interested in tech startups and technology as a way to address deep and structural challenges. So we are in a very unique position, and we're also seeing a lot of investment international. So I think 25% of all investments this year, higher in some regions and lower in others in some countries, are from international investors. And that's not just North America and Europe, that's also Southeast Asia, sometimes Latin America, sometimes China. So we're seeing more and more media attention. So now is the right time to be pitching these stories to relevant people. You don't want to spam anybody, but you also want to make your story available in case somebody should share it. So there's 3 different kinds of funding, or of announcements as I segment them. One is funding announcements, and that's pretty clear. We raised X amount of money. One is a thought leadership piece, which is almost like a guest article, and this can kind of come in as a feature. So if somebody is writing about industry X or geography Y, and they come and they feature you as one of those voices, it lends credibility to you as a founder or a spokesperson, or to brand at large. And these are things that you can also pitch beyond news. I would be very interested in writing about the Omani tech startup ecosystem. Noor, are you interested in having a guest article? Yes, I'm definitely interested in having a guest article. Please send it through and we'll have a conversation. We can brainstorm that. Oh, I'm really interested in talking about the challenges of fundraising. So we as MAGNiTT are trying to shift towards more user-generated content to kind of leverage the collective genius of our community, and make sure that we are amplifying voices that need to be amplified from community leaders. And also we are providing resources to other startups. So we are learning from each other's lessons learned, and we need to be transparent about our failures and transparent about our successes and share it so that we can move forward as an ecosystem together. So we're also opening the floor to thought leadership from our community, and I'll send over the link for this. We have a form. I'll send over the link for this at the end of this panel, at the end of this discussion. And then the third is so there's funding announcements and thought leadership. And then there's also, finally, there's like miscellaneous announcements, which are the ones that sometimes tend to be the least interesting. I mean, there's like product launches, and there's expansions, and there's, we signed an agreement and partnerships, etc. And or we hired a new team member. And whatever happens, it either needs to add value to a community, and this needs to be determined not by you, or it needs to be newsworthy for different reasons. And this needs to pass a so what test. So you don't use up any of your credits that you have with journalists pitching them a story that if you ask somebody right next to you would tell you, hey, I don't think this is it. And then ultimately, I think that's it for that section. After you have launched the campaign, you're going to want to start to track and analyze it. And there's a big debate about whether PR is quantifiable or not. But what we definitely know is you can track how effectively you have conducted your campaign. There's tons of very expensive tools for this. But what I do is, again, because this workshop is all about DIY and for free, is, again, I have another Excel sheet or Google sheet, and I share it with my colleagues, and I set up Google alerts for company name in English and Arabic, a couple of keywords that are lifted from the press release that I sent, other keywords that relate to effectively what my announcement has been. And I go and I filter through, I cipher through all of the Google results for the last week, etc., just to keep track of it. And then what I do is I will assign, there's more scientific ways to do this, but I will assign every single publication a score from 1 to 10. 10 being like, oh, this is the article of my dreams, this is the publication of my dreams, to 1 being like, oh, that's kind of okay for SEO, this got picked up from somewhere else, it's in a publication that I don't really know about, but it's good for backlinks. And then when you have a couple of campaigns, you're going to be able to measure those effectively against each other. And so that is it for my talk. I hope that was useful. And now I can begin answering some of the questions that you guys have sent in. Okay. How can I reach the media in the GCC if I'm in Egypt? So a way that you can do that is you can go and identify the journalists. You can identify the publications that you like. I mean, I can't say their names, but you can do your research about what is read there. And then, oh yeah, it should be fine. Oh, and then I can just dismiss it. Okay, yeah. So then you identify the publications, identify the journalists, and you can do that from their websites or you can do that from LinkedIn. Find the people that seem the most relevant to you. And then you find their emails, or you connect them, or you send them a request, or a lot of websites actually have how to reach them because they're still sourcing information. So you'll just send them a message on their website about us. So they usually have a tips section, or you identify the person. So that's how you can reach the media in GCC if you're in Egypt. Introductions are another way. So i.e. somebody else introduces you. So I've done that. So somebody's asked, the media is not interested in early stage startups. How can I attract them? So I don't think that's true. I think the media is very interested in early stage startups. I just think they need to have their hands held a little bit more. It depends on which media you're talking about. But you're targeting kind of the business or tech writers at publications. If it's not a publication geared solely for tech startups or startups in the Middle East or North Africa. But I mean, we need to tell them why this space is interesting. We need to do some of that work. We need to do some of that education work and tell them, you know, this company has managed to, in a year and a half, kind of half solve this problem that we've had for 3 or 4 years or 50 years even, you know, whether it's transport or if it's an infrastructure or if it's fintech, or, I mean, we're coming in and we're changing a lot of really, really old, really established industries. So that's the power of tech. So we need to kind of do that education, and we need to leverage the ones who are interested. As a just launched startup, how can I approach major corporates to partner with them or post challenge on my site? And what material do I need? Proposals, MOUs? I will unfortunately have to leave this answer to somebody who is more capable of answering it. I'm really not sure, but effectively how we reach out to people is we are not spammy. We send them, we tailor our messages to them, and we make them very clearly see the value of what it is that we're proposing. Please send an example of a press release. Yeah, I'll do that in the email that I'll send out subsequently. Thank you for asking for that. Is there a way to see some sort of documented case study or something you can share for reference? Yeah, okay, absolutely. We can definitely do that. I'll send an email after this session is finished. How can I plan a simple PR campaign? Super, super easy. Figure out what you're saying, why you're saying it, who you're saying it to, and then write a very clear, simple, concise press release. And then figure out where it's been published. Does a campaign have to be huge? Using a lot of different channels? No, it doesn't. It depends on what your objective is. If you want, so this is specifically PR for tech startups, but there's two kinds of PR. There's like B2B PR. There's, I would like to be seen by investors or potential partners, or there's, I'm a B2C startup and I would like to be seen by potentially my consumers, who could be a total addressable market of 100 million people. And those two questions have very different answers. So for the B2B side, no, absolutely not. You just want to be speaking to whoever you want to be speaking to. You're just trying to meet that clear objective. If we need help with preparing a PR kit, would you be able to support with this? I mean, you can definitely email me and I will do my best to support, but things are a bit crazy. I also work at a startup. I'm sure you guys know what that's like. As a sports startup, would you contact sports news sites as well as news publications, or will appearing in sports news sites put you in a bracket of sports rather than a sports tech startup? Okay, so this is a really, really cool question. Thank you, Ali. What you are trying to achieve is, so a lot of us fit in these two different categories, right? So am I a transport company or am I a tech company? And I think that the balance of this, the sweet spot of this, is to never just do one. It's absolutely fine to get exposure as a specific industry startup without having the tech side of it. But by virtue of us being tech startups who are built like tech startups, who have raised money from tech investors or VCs or accelerators or whatever, the tech will always bleed through. And I think that in our messaging, whenever, so let's say you have an interview with a sports channel or a magazine or whatever, it's important to emphasize because we're bringing two worlds together. So we're also bringing tech to a lot of industries that historically haven't had a lot of tech. And I think we benefit from evangelizing that, not just as an industry, but as companies, because it's new and it's interesting and it's different. And we're also educating the people around how to deal with us, because we're still kind of new. In Arabic, there's a lot of language that doesn't translate directly. Dealing with journalists in different languages is also very difficult sometimes, particularly around tech entrepreneurship. The jargon isn't there. So when we are doing those two things, we need to be clear about what our core messages are, and sometimes our core messages are around tech. How do you create a proper PR kit? What are the main items in a good one? The proper items, the essential items in any PR kit is a good photo that is not like a passport photo. Sorry, I've forgotten the word. It needs to be like a horizontal layout photo. So think when you read an article, what that photo looks like. Never your logo. The cover photo should never be your logo. It needs to be like people, movement, something that's relevant to the story. People shaking hands, people signing an agreement, these things. But a photo with human beings in it that has life, it's going to be compelling visually, because journalists also want clicks. So make it easy for them to get clicks. That's how they will start sharing your story, if there's something in there to share of value to their communities. You need a press release, sometimes in English, sometimes in Arabic, depends on who you're reaching out to. And you need a good photo. Those are the only things you need. Sometimes people, depending on what they're doing, will add a video, will add a logo, will add 5 photos. You don't need any of those things. You just need those 2 things. And if you're working with a journalist kind of on a more one-on-one thing, they will often ask you. But the press kit doesn't need more than those 2 things. It's recommended for your individual PR campaigns to all fit into a story about the company. How do you come up with the story and make sure all your press releases fit into that? So they don't need to be religiously fitting in. They don't need to be identical, but it helps to know as a company what you're saying, and just to make sure that you're not saying 1,500 different things. Make sure your spokespeople and your founding team are aligned on messaging. That we are, even if it doesn't need to be a 5-day super expensive exercise, but just what are your values as a company? What's your story as a company? If you're trying to build a community around your company, what's important to your people? And you're not throwing messages at people. It has to be part of a dialogue. So just to make sure, it's a feeling, and a lot of people will kind of immediately know if something fundamentally feels off brand or like out of voice. But you can't make sure, other than, you know your brand, you know what fits and what doesn't fit. And make sure that what is your brand is kind of, almost impossible, but kind of agreed across your team, or at least the people that are speaking to external partners like media. UAE market, please inform me about a UAE market. It's a down market or good for scaling. Again, this is a question that I cannot answer in my PR for Startups webinar, but there are tons of mentors available on MAGNiTT that you can reach out to who I think can answer this question. Okay. What should we ideally include in our press kit on the website? Ideally, what you want to include in the press kit on the website is one kind of foundational statement. It depends, actually, sorry, let me take that question 2 steps back. It depends on what you're trying to achieve from this on the website, because most websites, unless you're like pushing out an album, most websites just need like an avenue for press to come in. They just need to be able, so for media inquiries, please contact person X and have their email, don't make them click a button, have their email clearly available. But the press kit can always contain your most recent, if you want somebody to go in and download it, but in a lot of cases that's not really necessary. It needs to contain a very, very clear brief about the company. It also needs to contain a couple of photos and an avenue for them to reach out to the relevant person. And it's very important that the relevant person is very responsive. So actually a mistake that a lot of people make is that after they've just issued a press release, say a funding announcement, somebody goes MIA, the team goes MIA. So you publish it and you say, I want this published tomorrow. And then the press are obviously going to come back and say, okay, we've got a couple of questions. We'd like an exclusive quote here. What do you think of this? What do you want here? And then the person seems to vanish and then it kind of gets forgotten. So make sure that when you issue a press release, the day you're going live, there's somebody available to field these questions. Is it better to pitch to the founders? Journalists are more likely to respond to founders as opposed to PR. No, actually, sometimes I think it's better to, founders are probably some of the best spokespeople for their companies, but founders are a lot better to pitch to investors. And something that I say to a lot of founders is you're not in PR. You're a founder. You can pitch to other people and that's fine. As long as the PR person knows the brand, knows the story, knows what they're trying to achieve very clearly, I think sometimes it's better because PR people speak the language of journalists more because there's so much interchange between the two. Whereas founders can be a bit too pushy and kind of like put off journalists. But the founder is always the best person usually to seek a quote from. They can articulate the business much more clearly sometimes than other people on the team. It's their baby, right? What should the ideal PR pitch email include? Can you give us an example of pitches you've personally liked or picked? Yeah, so I'm lucky because I do this on both sides. So I do media pitches for MAGNiTT and I receive media pitches for MAGNiTT. So I get to see both sides of that world and it's very interesting. When I'm sending them, I like to be as concise and as clear as possible and to put the item in bold. So I can send you guys a screenshot of that. Also in the follow-up email. And the things that come to us that make sense are where there's a clear hook. It makes sense. I understand why I would be covering this. It's, you know, a rebrand is a really great example. A rebrand is very important to your company, but how important is it to the rest of the audience? Does the story add value to the rest of the audience? That's how, think about it like this. If you were reading the publication that you're pitching to, and you saw exactly this article, but it wasn't your company, would you think, oh, this is a bit pointless? Or would you be like, oh, this is really interesting? And be honest with yourself about it. It needs to pass the, would I read this test? And then, is it better to tailor different press releases, pitches to media depending on geographic locations, markets? Absolutely. 100%. If you're pitching a MENA tech startup to a MENA tech publication, you don't have to do a lot of the foundational work. You don't have to say, this is who we are and this is what we do. And when you're pitching it to a North American one or a Southeast Asian one, no, you have to do that work. And for big publication hits, you're tailoring it for publication X. That's not going to be a generic press release. That's going to be a specific media pitch that you've written out. Bearing in mind, so you're going to look at the journalist history. What have they been writing about recently? And you're going to tailor that pitch. I really liked what you wrote about this. How about this as an alternative perspective? Or aren't you tired about writing about this all the time? Here's this, you know? So those pitches can be very, very niche and very personalized. And that's key to building long-lasting relationship. So even if they say, no, sorry, I don't want to publish this, they'll come back in 3-4 months and be like, oh, I thought about this. How about I do this? If I'm approaching an online magazine to feature my startup, for example, in an article, how do I do so? A press release won't be convenient, I believe. So it depends on how you're reaching out to them. What's in it for the journal? I mean, again, PR, this is free PR. So they're publishing it for free. What is in it for the journalist to publish this story? So if you know, and I don't know how you know, but if you know that they're writing an article about the top 6 core technology companies to watch, and you know that you're a core technology company that fits the mandate, yeah, then you can reach out to them and be like, hey, I don't know if you guys have heard about us, but recently we did blah, blah, blah. But it can't be spammy, it can't be salesy. It needs to be more, sometimes you can just reach out to a journalist and say, hey, this is what I do, one sentence, never more than one sentence. I know that you're interested in writing about tech entrepreneurship. How about I take you out for a coffee and we can discuss what you're interested in? So treat them like you would somebody that you're taking on a date, right? So we need to play it slowly. But if you want an entire article written about you, then a press release is typically the best way to do it. And then, Sarah, what are some great PR podcasts to follow? I have no idea. I don't listen to any podcasts. And I think that is it. I think that is it for the questions. You've mentioned that you rate media on a 10-point scale. What are your metrics? Okay, so I hope I don't get into trouble here, but I'll tell you. It will depend on the objective of your campaign. But let's standardize it for some kind of funding or tech PR announcement. Okay. One is there's like a lot of in Arabic language publications. There's a lot of websites that will just copy paste something that's been written, and they kind of just almost like RSS feeds, but websites, and they aggregate everything. And you can tell that these are not super high value, other than for SEO, because you've never heard of them and they kind of have some weird names. Okay, and then there's the middle pack, which will constantly take articles and reprint them without doing like original content around them, or this is exactly what they cover and they cover it consistently, etc., etc. So like how credible they are, how many people have heard of them, and you can kind of you feel this, you know. If you're a PR person, there are very few publications that you haven't heard of if you're doing your job right. I mean, obviously there's like loads in like Latin America or Southeast Asia that you don't know about, but I mean, we should definitely start getting to know them. But for the ones here, we should know them. So and also you can tell the ones that kind of only do advertorial, so only do paid content, are typically not super high value ones, because I think we as readers, we as an audience have kind of become very desensitized to advertorials, and we can see them very clearly, especially because now people have to tag them. It's kind of a بالبلدي يعني, I feel it. And you will be able to as well, right? You will know when you've got a publication that you were really working very hard to get, or when you got something that you know you can get. Who do I look up to in terms of PR handling? Like, who does it best? So that's actually a really difficult question, because I think the people that do PR really, really well don't look like they're doing PR really, really well. But I like to think of people who have had like crises, and that we don't no longer remember those crises because that was kind of expert PR handling, or the people that publish, forget PR, but PR is PR, but people who publish really, really interesting thought leadership pieces. I mean, A16Z is a great example, and I mean, maybe we don't term it PR, but they're producing content with Mary Meeker's internet trends, or people who are producing content that we then go and consume and we learn from. And those aren't explicitly PR things, but it's producing content that people want to consume that also adds credibility to your brand, and makes people think of you in a way that's a little bit nicer. I've read an article which is completely false and misaligned. So what's your view on the authenticity of the article? So actually, I think that we as an industry of people who publish announcements need to be super careful about this, because it's happened quite a few times. So sometimes it's difficult for us when people are producing content like this and you're publishing it very quickly. Sometimes it's very difficult to cross-check. People will say that they're award-winning or that they've raised X amount of money. So a way that we do that is raised X amount of money is a relatively cut and dry one. You verify with the investors, right? If I say that I've raised money from investor Y and that article comes out, investor Y is going to reach out to me and say, that's not true at all, take this down, right? And then that kind of ruins your credibility long term. Or award-winning, sometimes you can just use Google and you're like, hey, this doesn't feel right, and then figure that out. But I actually, this is why the shift to sort of like more user-generated, community-generated content is very important, because it's very difficult to do that as like one entity, unless you're like a proper journalist and you're not doing a bunch of other things at the same time. I would like an answer to that myself about how we can be better about making sure that the content that we're pushing is truthful. Do early stage startups need PR? You've also mentioned that PR has to be in line with company objectives. What metrics should we use to show the impact of PR to the organization? Okay. This is a really, really great question. Depends, first and foremost, about how we define early stage. I think soft touch PR is really, and this is not, doesn't necessarily have to be hype. This doesn't necessarily have to be the entrepreneurs everywhere and on social. I mean, sometimes entrepreneurs have, more important things to do than this, but kind of in the same way that social media is like super important just to like connect with your community. Sometimes for B2B communications, especially, I think PR is very solid, because if you're trying to cement, it's a momentum thing, right? If you're trying to cement a partnership, you've just landed a partnership, a super, super important partnership, okay? With the biggest person in your field that you should partner with. And you've done that without the help of PR. You've just like gone and done the work. By communicating that partnership, sometimes when you're trying to close the next deal, it becomes a little bit easier to close, because somewhere in the back of the person that you're meeting's mind is a very clear message that, oh, there's a seal of validity there. PR for investment is kind of functions in the same way. And this doesn't have to be, oh, look, they raised money, but it could be, I've built this cool technology and I want to share with my community why this is like super different, how I'm like really leveraging like a unique proprietary technology to completely change the dating scene or to completely change the way that people bank. And reading that written by you also lends, even if you're ghostwriters, PR people, we ghostwrite all the time. But even if that's something that's come out of your entrepreneur, or if you are an entrepreneur, definitely please get somebody to proofread it. It lends a little bit, if the piece is thoughtful and it's well reasoned, you have more faith in the entrepreneur, because you're like, oh, I can see how this person is thinking and I can see how they're communicating. And an example of that is I'm reading this book and the name of it has escaped me, but about how we build communities. And it's written by somebody who runs an agency that do community building. But the book is super helpful for me. And so every time I read it, even though, I mean, bad example, because I can't remember their name, but I'm like, oh, this agency must be really good at what it does. So it's kind of that association of expertise. So you've talked about making sure that it is correct content, but what would be the best way to deal with a publication that has a wrong element about your startup in it, but it's already been published? You ask for it to be removed, or you just go, no. Okay, so print, you can't really do anything about, except sometimes they can issue a correction, but you should always reach out to the publication and tell them, hey, this piece of information is incorrect. Find somebody on that organization, LinkedIn, stalk them, message them, get their number. Because then if they've written something about you before and now they know who you are, as in they've had some kind of like human to human touch point with you, they'll be able to ask you again when there's something going on. And there will be a bit of like, ooh, oops, shouldn't have done that. So just almost on a person-to-person level, they might be more likely to do something nice for you next time around because they like kind of, you know, messed up on the last round. So definitely always reach out to them, but always be polite. Be like, hey, this is Ali. Oh, hi, Ali. This is Ali, founder of blah, blah. This information is correct. Could you change it, please? Thank you very much. If you're interested in sports tech, let me know and we can go out for a coffee. Oh, thank you. MAGNiTT is super lucky to have me. Thank you. Please, can you make a private group on WhatsApp and send a request concerning a PR kit and informative and useful questions on a daily basis? Maybe I can just send an email and you guys will all have my email address and you can just message me. But it might be cool. I've been thinking about this for a while. It might be cool to have like a PR support group where we can ask each other questions and like have like a small sub community where we can share advice. Because sometimes there's stuff that I don't really have answers to. And I'd like to be able to like leverage other people's PR expertise, and I'm available as well. Can you give us examples, names of media organizations with a score of 10 on your rating scale in MENA and the US? So I'm a huge fan of TechCrunch and Bloomberg. And in the Middle East, definitely MAGNiTT. There's no other competition for us. No, but actually in Cairo, I really like Enterprise. I think Enterprise are a fantastic publication. Oh, a PR Slack support group. Yeah, if you would be interested in that, I'll try and make a link for a PR Slack support group. That would be very helpful. Oh, thank you. Okay, so if nobody has any other questions, then I think we're done. Thank you so much for attending and for all of your amazing questions. I'll be sending you guys an email soon. Oh, wait, there's another chat. Please send it to me. Oh, I'm sorry, I sounded like a robot to whoever didn't like VoIP. Okay, thank you. Thank you for coming.